A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I'm going to request all presenters and panelists to have their videos on so we can start the program. And I'd like to request Fahim Ahmed Sahib to start off the program with the Quran recitation.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن تاب وعمل صالحا فإنه يتوب إلى الله متابا والذين لا يشهدون الزور وإذا مروا باللغو مروا كراما والذين إذا ذكروا بآيات ربهم لم يخروا عليها صما وعميانا والذين يقولون ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما أولئك يجزون الغرفة بما صبروا ويلقون فيها تحية وسلاما. I will now say the translation. I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the rejected. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. And those who repent and do good deeds, indeed, turn to Allah with true repentance. And those who bear not false witness, and when they pass by anything vain, they pass on with dignity. And those who, when they are reminded of the signs of their Lord, fall not down thereat deaf and blind. And those who say, Our Lord, grant us of our wives and children the delight of our eyes, and make us a model for the righteous. It is such as will be rewarded a high place in paradise because they were steadfast, and they will be received therein with greeting and peace. Jazakumullah.
Jazakallah. I'd like to request respected Naib Amir Saab to lead us in prayer and opening remarks.
Please join me in dua. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ameen. Jazakumullah to all of you who have joined this series, which is a different series, and I would like to take a couple of minutes to explain why we are doing this. This year's Shura proposal for Jamaat Ahmadiyya USA Tarbiyat Department was about engaging or increasing the engagement of our members. And one of the root causes by 15 different subcommittees all across the country was identified as parenting. So the Shura recommendation, one of the clauses which the Khalifatul Masih has approved says, National Tarbiyat Department should conduct a series of webinars to educate members about Islamic parenting based on the guidance provided by Khulafai Ahmadiyyat. Similar programs should then be conducted locally. So the key difference in this series, I wanted to make sure everyone understands. One, this is not our creation. This is now approved by Khalifatul Masih, and we have to stay on it for 1 year. So every month we will talk about a different aspect of parenting. Number two, it can't just be one national webinars. We are very grateful to the hundreds of our members and families who join in, but still it's a small percentage compared to our total number in USA. So these programs then have to be followed up locally. That's up to a local Southern missionary and Tarbiyat secretary, whether they want to use a small amount of time in their monthly meeting or hold a separate in-person program or a Zoom program. That's of course up to them, but there has to be follow-up locally. So it penetrates deeper into the layers of our membership. The third thing is, inshallah ta'ala, we will be engaging many of our younger missionaries as panelists. So we stay perfectly in line with the Islamic teaching and what Khulafa have said. We will be using short clips from the videos of Khalifatul Masih, as well as some questions to engage our audience. Some of the topics you should know in the coming months. The Huzur has talked about making friendships with your children. Some people struggle with that. So we will try to explore that topic. How do you make friendships? How do we keep a balance between sons and daughters? Why it's important for husband and wife to work on their own relationship if they want to raise good children. How do you inculcate the habit of daily salat and Quran in your children? How do you deal with issues like dating and drugs? And how do you really talk about difficult subjects like LGBT or pornography? All of these things have been directed to us repeatedly by Khalifatul Masih in the various sermons. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that moving forward, we will be going deeper into each one of these topics every month. And may Allah Ta'ala bless all of you. And ultimately just pray that Allah Ta'ala accepts this meager effort, forgives our sins, because ultimately it's all with prayers. Back to you, Murabi Sep.
Jazakallah Nabi Mirsab, we'll get right into the program. Najib bhai, if you can break down the rules and expectations of how this is going to work.
Jazakallah Rabbi Sab. Yes, so as Rabbi Sab, as you mentioned, I'll quickly go over the ground rules. So as we've always done in the past, we prioritize keeping the sessions as interactive as possible. We want to hear from you. So inshallah, for this webinar, we'll be using the pre-submitted questions, which we'll prioritize first and foremost, as we always do. And those questions you can submit to the National Tarbiyat Department, as has been shared with everyone. After that, with time permitting, inshallah, we'll also get questions from the raise hand feature. So again, as everyone I'm sure has become an expert at this point, to use the raise hand feature, you'll click the blue hand icon on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. It's important to note that you'll appear in our queue at that point, and inshallah, throughout the session, we'll get to the questions of those members who have raised their hands. Please do stay in front of your screen at all times. If you have your hand raised, you know your chance to ask your question might come sooner than you think, and we don't want to delay it too much. As Naib Mirsab has mentioned, alhamdulillah, we're joined by many hundreds of our brothers and sisters for each session. So we please would like to emphasize a 30-second limit for the questions. We want to get to as many as possible, so please do keep your questions concise. Another point to mention as well is that inshallah, as we always have done, we'll use a Menti polling system to keep the sessions interactive, to keep it fun for everybody. And so inshallah, when we get to those, I'll share the instructions for that. And last and most importantly is to remember that alhamdulillah, we're finally being able to go back to our mosques in many cities. And I know that many of us are sitting in our homes, but this is still the Jamaat of the Prophet ﷺ. And so we should please treat these sessions like we're sitting in our mosque and observe the proper etiquettes. With that being said, Rabbi Saab, over to you. Looking forward to the session.
Jazakallah Najib bhai. I'm thankful for, my other brothers on the call, Rizwan bhai and Azam bhai, our respected missionary panelists. And they're going to help us explore this first session that we're doing of raising children in the West. And for everyone knows, anyone who has children, that no one here can stand with their head tall and being confident. This is such a society where, you really need to deal with this in humility and pray and make that your prerequisite, that foundation, for the connection and how to traverse the society. So with that being said, I'm going to ask Rizwan bhai if you can share some of your 2 cents of, what it means to raise children here, and what would you like to share?
Yeah, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I'll just share a very brief statement of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salam on upbringing of children. He said that true guidance and training belongs to God Almighty. And then he goes on to say that I pray for my children and require them to follow a broad set of rules of behavior and no more. Beyond this, I put my full trust in Allah Almighty and the confidence that the seed of good fortune inherent in each of them will flower at its proper time. Now, for me personally, I'm not raising teenagers in the West yet. My oldest is 8 years old. But what I can say is something about what it's like to be raised in the West myself, and what I found to be effective to have a profound influence on me. And for me, it was just the sheer investment that my mother put into our upbringing. And this doesn't mean that this applies to me because I'm a Waqf-e-Zindagi or anything like that. Even if I had gone completely on the wrong path, I could still sit here as an example of exactly what not to do and still say that these things in my upbringing had an impact on me. I may not have benefited from them, even in those times where I was completely being rebellious and everything. Even then, I could still say that, yes, my mother put in her 100% effort and it had an impact on me, even though I didn't accept it. So that point on raising children in the West is not really about, whether it affected me or my siblings or anything. It's just about, did it have an impact? And there, what I observed is that, with my mother, before I was born, was, that spirit of the mother of Hazrat Maryam alayhi salam, that nazartu laka ma fi batni, that I dedicate to you what is in my womb. And her desire for me to be a Waqf-e-Zindagi and for me to serve the Jamaat was so intense that it was something that was felt and didn't need to be said. It wasn't that someone was constantly nagging me that you have to serve the Jamaat and be a Waqf-e-Zindagi. It wasn't that a parent who's forcing you that you have to become a doctor, you have to do this, where you feel averse to it or anything. It was just a pure passion that was a flame that at times gets passed on to another heart and at times doesn't, but that flame does exist. So I think for me, what had the most impact for me growing up as a youth being raised in the West, being on the receiving end of parenting, was just a sincere and intense desire from my mother that my son and my children serve the Jamaat, be good Muslims, serve Allah Almighty. One thing that I particularly remember is when I was going at one point, just as a teenager, way off track, and I'd gotten in a lot of trouble for something. At that time, it wasn't that my mother had given me a lecture. She hadn't gotten mad at me or tried to scare me or anything. It was just a sense of disappointment that I felt from her. And then I saw my entire youth, my entire lifetime of just the sheer investment in prayers and everything that she had put in. And I realized that the intensity with which she wanted her son to serve Allah Almighty and the Jamaat was more intense than perhaps anything that I may even feel in my life. And it seemed as if even if I devoted my life to no other purpose than just fulfilling this purpose that she had, then that would be a good use of a life. It wouldn't be a waste of a life. I don't see myself ever believing in something or wanting something as intensely as she wants her son to serve Allah Almighty. So again, here, it wasn't anything about someone nagging me, someone giving me a lecture. It was just something that was felt. And it was something that was experienced throughout all of those rebellious teenage years, despite all those cultural differences of having immigrant parents and being born and raised in the United States. None of that matters when it comes to a language of the heart and a language that is felt despite any kind of cultural or generational differences. There are so many times that it happened where, I would be doing something wrong or something was happening, and she would find out by ways that I knew that she would tell herself that she'd seen through a dream or Allah Ta'ala had told her something like that. And it wasn't because necessarily, this only applies to saints or anything like that. It's just that when someone prays for someone that intensely, when someone is so concerned for someone else, then naturally, then Allah Almighty accepts those prayers as well. And at times Allah Almighty would inform her that, I'm going through a difficult time or something's happening. So there also was just firsthand experience that there is something happening here that I can't explain myself. I know there is something of greater significance than me. And it is something that I experience so repeatedly that I know that if I do something wrong, she's going to find out in some way or the other. And also, if I do something wrong, I'm going to suffer for it in a way in this life. The taqdeer aam of Allah Ta'ala is just the general laws of nature. When you do something wrong, sometimes you suffer, sometimes you don't. But then when Allah Ta'ala chooses to really accept somebody's prayers, and there's a taqdeer khas, where if an Ahmadi Muslim does something wrong, then sometimes you get punished right away for it. That's a special mercy of Allah Ta'ala, that He punishes you right away for it. And you see a pattern in your life where you know that, okay, if I do something wrong, it's not like anybody else who does something wrong. I should know better, and there's going to be a consequence that's not going to come from my parents or somebody else. It's going to come from Allah Almighty. And that's just a blessing of the prayers of parents. So when it comes to raising children in the West, I mean, just my experience, which again, I say holds true, whether I'm a Waqf Zindagi or whether I'm not. Even if I completely rejected all that influence and I was just the worst person sitting here giving an example of what not to do, I would still say that even though I didn't accept that positive influence, that it did have an impact and that it was effective, that she did try her absolute best. I can't really raise any objection. So those are the points that I have that I wanted to share. Jazakallah.
But that's powerful, because you don't have to be a scholar or anything to connect with God. That's what I took away from it, is that if parents, anyone, they just have a genuine desire and welfare for their children, and they channel that to Allah Ta'ala, Allah Ta'ala has different ways of bringing about that, regardless of class, creed, language. That was really good. I loved it. Jazakallah. Azam Bhai, from your side, what's your 2 cents on this?
Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nasalli ala rasulihil kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala abdihil masil ma'ud alayhi salatu wassalam. Well, it's not fair to put me after that amazing testimonial. But mashallah, I'm very humbled to have known Rizwan for a very long time through our time in Jamia. It's amazing to just be awed again by his inspirational stories. But for me, then, when you asked that I have 5 minutes to kind of have an icebreaker on this topic, I think it got me thinking, because we all, if we listen to it, remember our respected Amir Saab's exercise for us at his last address at the West Coast Jalsa Salana. And it was a tearful address where he made us realize so many obligations that we have as parents, and actually apologized in a way to the generations that we had lost. But at the end, he left us with an exercise that was basically to go back home and answer this question: what is more important, your children or your bank account? And for me, as just a listener to that, it just summed up that whole, I guess, matter that we're discussing. The cultural identities and all those things, they plague everyone. But the fact of the matter is that there's something more pulling a stronger gravitational pull, which Khulafa have talked about, and specifically Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Aziz has targeted, which is that the wealth and the race, the rat race. So that was a really good exercise for us to follow up on, because the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam reminded us of our obligations towards not just Allah, which hopefully we're all doing, our daily prayers, our recitation of the Holy Quran, our zikr ilahi and all sorts, but more importantly, our hukukul ibad, which really, parenting is the height of trying to achieve that honor. The Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had reminded us that our children are really our tickets to either paradise or hell. And so the investment that we make in this regard is absolutely paramount. It's the key to our salvation. So those were my 2 cents. And I think it's a really important topic to discuss. We're all going through our own unique and diverse challenges. But you're gonna understand that if there's anybody that can provide us with an opportunity and to find resolution. It's the Jamaat of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam. You know, he came not just for Asia, he came for everywhere. And also, if you know, there's an excerpt of Hazrat Khalifa Sani, Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu, guiding, I think it was a family that was traveling to the West, says, and I'm paraphrasing, that remember, you're entering into the lion's den. There can be only two outcomes. Either you're so strong and you're so self-confident in your ways that the lion becomes awe-inspired by you, or the second outcome is that you'll just get up and eaten up by that lion. So I mean, these are parables that we can reference and talk about, but it is a challenge, but there are opportunities to learn from each other as well, and I'm very humbled to be part of it. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Azam Bhai. That's very, very helpful. So I think Najib also mentioned we have some pre-submitted questions. We also have questions coming in the chat box. I'll just take the opportunity to say that if you want to raise your hand and do it, you can share your question that way. No formality, or just put it in the chat box if you don't want to make yourself known, or it's just easier to type. So both those options are there. So we've received a couple of anonymous questions or some questions in the chat box. I'll just go right there to it. And if you want to start sharing your questions via the by raising your hand, please start raising your hand. So first question I'll share with the panel is, how can I explain to my child scientifically that homosexuality is not right? So Rizwan Bhai, if you can help us out with that.
Sure. So, this just comes back to the same point on why promiscuity is not right either, scientifically, because in our society, we have STDs that are spreading literally like a plague. It's a public health crisis, and it's directly linked to promiscuity, sexual behavior that goes against what the Holy Quran and Islam has taught. And when a person society goes away from promiscuity and practices what Islam has taught, then this problem disappears. It's a very modern problem. It's just a scientific issue that is action reaction. So the same thing applies with homosexuality, in the same way that when a person does a heterosexual act which goes against what Islam teaches, and it results in a plague-like spread of diseases. So that same thing applies with homosexuality, that when people act on this physical act, then there is a much higher rate of sexually transmitted diseases among those people who do this act. Among gay men, this is facts you can find on the CDC, that there is a much higher propensity and exposure towards these diseases that doesn't exist in heterosexual people. And it's just because it is an unhealthy behavior. With those who are lesbian, of course, like I've mentioned before, that they're not even physically capable of acting on that homosexual desire they have. So the fact that they even get STDs in the first place is a separate issue, is something that's a point of concern. But the main point to remember is that even if we don't go into religion, we can advise people that it is unhealthy from a scientific perspective, from the perspective by which we would give anyone advice, medical advice for their health, that it is unhealthy to engage in behavior, recreational behavior that puts you at a much higher risk of contracting diseases, which now we're getting to a point in some of those sexually transmitted diseases, we don't even have any antibiotics that are going to work for much longer. So this is the way that we can explain that this angle of STDs, it's the dirty laundry of our society that nobody wants to talk about, but everybody knows about. Everybody is hiding it. The frequency, the degree to which people are suffering from these embarrassing diseases that they don't want to discuss. But this is the dirty laundry of our society that has to be explained to people, even if it hits a nerve, that this kind of behavior, it results in a higher risk factor in these kinds of diseases, and those demographics who have multiple sexual partners and who engage in homosexual sexual activity, then they have a much higher risk of being exposed to these kinds of diseases.
Jazakallah, Rizwan Bhai. Well put. Next question we've received is tarbiyat enforcement or delivery of knowledge? So Rizwan Bhai, Azam Bhai, how would you reframe that?
Is tarbiyat enforcement or delivery of knowledge? I mean, I guess, what do they say? La ikraha fi din, there's no compulsion in matters of religion, but once you do accept Ahmadiyyat as your deen, there's clear stipulations of how we should be functioning. And so tarbiyat allows us to achieve those skills, if you want to call it that, and be part of the Jamaat as the ideal Hazrat Masih Maud wanted us to be, lovers of Allah, lovers of his Prophet, and ambassadors of Islam all over the world.
Perfect. All right, so next question is, how can I refrain from comparing my child to others or getting worried about milestones other children's are reaching? Rizwan Bhai, what do you have to say?
I mean, there definitely should be a spirit of competition. Fastabikul khairat is a good thing. So if we see other people's children's getting ahead of ours, then we should have a spirit of competition that we apply to ourselves as well. It's not that we just push our kids to do something we never do. So that vying and competing for good actions, that's competition is a basis for real human progress. Without competition, we don't really progress. Whether it's human civilization progressing in wartime, that's where we make the most inventions, the most we strain ourselves to make innovations. Or when it comes to competition in sports or in education, any of these things, that's where people really push themselves. So competition is a good thing. But I think what the questioner might be referring to is where it starts to get toxic and materialistic, where we're just constantly judging our children, putting them down, saying that your cousin is doing this, why aren't you doing that? Or look at that person who's doing this, why aren't you doing that? So, I mean, it's just obvious that there has to be positive reinforcement. How did the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam encourage people? Did he just spend his whole time, belittling people, putting them down, comparing them to their cousin or their sibling or somebody? Or did he give positive reinforcement? Did he do tarbiyat with love? So what we see in the example of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with his children, we see with Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam with his children and the khulafa, is that there was a competition to be good, to strive in goodness, but it was never in a way where the children reacted to it negatively. They felt they were being belittled, or that they felt that they were inferior in comparison to someone else.
Perfect, perfect. Jazakallah. The next question we have is, can you please elaborate? And we actually have a clip from Hazur. We'll share it right after you, the panelists, share their perspective on this. How do you cut? Hold on one second. Can you please elaborate what friendship with children means and how to build that relationship? Children don't typically consider you're the friend if you're not engaged in the same activities as them. So if you don't play video games, you're not watching the same TV shows that they do, they won't connect with you at the same level. So Azim Bhai, what do you have to say?
Yeah, friendship, Hazrat Saab has reminded us to develop a kind. I mean, this is just a natural thing when you develop a relationship with your children as friends, and this is what we need in this day and age. You'll notice that it breeds a happy home, and happy children are, emotionally attached. They are connected with their parents. Speaking of myself, I have a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 3-year-old child. I can't speak to the fact that they don't play video games because we've never had that opportunity to entertain that. As far as developing that relationship is, your children are outside with their friends, and when they come home, you have that opportunity to really get to learn about what they're going through and their challenges. We do talk about that, and then sometimes there are alarms that show up where that you find out that there were certain conversations or certain things that were had. Then you have to build a trust with your child on that, so that you can kind of explain to him. And every child is different. Some children are easier to they get their parents easier. Sometimes you have to use other methods and means, but having good communication skills, and every parent knows their child best, what works and what doesn't work. But that's what I say, is that despite the fact that you might not share common interests, whatever your child sees growing up, which are your interests, they will automatically develop, hopefully. And this is that amazing opportunity for us to, again, lead by example. Like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us that the best gift that a parent can leave for his children are manners and his ways, mannerisms.
Excellent. Jazakallah Azam Bhai, appreciate that. Do we have any raised hands? Najib Bhai, I saw a couple. Not sure if they're still raised, and we can go to live questions. If anyone has live questions, we can take those in.
And I don't see any raised hands now, but again, it's an open invitation to anyone who has a question, they want to verbally ask it. Feel free to raise your hand, and inshallah we'll get to you. But at the time, Rabbi said we don't have any.
Okay, I saw one go up, but they put it down. Achha, so we'll go to, matter of fact, this one's good. Please discuss how we can handle sibling rivalry. What are some tips from an Islamic perspective in assuring they are showing kindness as home as well as outside? Rizwan Bhai.
So again, I have to draw from, I guess, a little bit of my own experience, growing up with two siblings and then having, kids who are siblings. And I think, when I used to have a lot of, fights and things like that with my sisters, and I see that happening with my kids as well. But I mean, just personally, what I try to do is to just, always remind them that what is our intention? Are we trying to bother the other person? Are we trying to make them angry? That sort of thing. So, I mean, sibling rivalry, it exists inevitably when there is love coming from the parents. I've noticed that in an environment where it's kind of toxic and the parents aren't doing their job, then the kids kind of bond together. There's not as much of a rivalry between them. The same thing happens in a school as well. If the teacher, the administrators are doing a terrible job, then the students will bond together. They don't have a rivalry with each other. They have a rivalry with the staff. They bonded together out of necessity. So if parents aren't doing their job, then at times the kids will bond together against their parents, seeing that my parents aren't doing their job. We need to, support each other. So if there is a degree of sibling rivalry, it shows that they are competing for our love, that we are giving them love, we're doing something right. That's inevitably going to happen. But then, I think in that situation, and I mean, I found this effective to a degree, which is to also, always encourage my kids and our kids that we interact with each other with love, and then set an example through husband and wife, then I think that's most effective. And I think that's one of the points that Huzur has mentioned that we're going to share later on as well, that when a husband and wife are, loving to each other, then the children are not exposed to the kind of toxic disagreements that they then start mimicking and then expressing to each other. So if we see that our children are having a rivalry, which is really getting nasty, then maybe we can ask ourselves, do I ever talk to my wife in that way? Or do I ever talk to my husband in that way? Because maybe that might be where they're getting it from.
Perfect. Jazakallah Rizwan Bhai. Najiba, I think I see a couple raised hands. I see one at least. Let's give him a chance.
Sure. Let's get to it, Rabbi Saab. So Atiq Saab, I see you have your hand raised. Please go ahead, unmute yourself, and you can be our first question of the day. Atiq Saab, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. So I think we're having some hard time getting to Atiq Saab.
No worries. I think what we can do is in the meanwhile, quickly play, if you can, Najibai, pull up that clip that Hazur referenced very recently about friendship with children. I think it'll be a good reminder. It was covered, but hearing it from Hazrat Saab, from Khalifatul Masih, has a different impact. So if we can have that clip played.
माओं की तो ये तरबियत करें कि जो आजकल कि यहाँ बच्चियाँ पढ़ रही हैं उनके साथ उनके ताल्लुकात दोस्ताना होने चाहिए और उनको जो उनका यहाँ एक्सपोजर है बाहर निकल के यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में जाके कॉलेजेस में जाके उसके साथ अगर माएँ पूरी तरह तालीम याफ्ता नहीं हैं तो फिर वो मदद लें आप लोगों से, लेकिन उसके बावजूद उनके साथ ताल्लुक़ रखें लड़कियों के साथ, और लड़कियों की तरबियत ये करें कि वो जैसी मर्ज़ी तालीम हासिल करें, लेकिन जो अहद है दीन को दुनिया में मुकद्दम रखने का उसको सामने रखें, और वो क्या है सिर्फ दुनिया में ना पड़ जाएं। यहाँ उनको ये भी रियलाइज़ करवाना चाहिए कि यहाँ आके अल्लाह ताला ने जो फ़ज़ल किए हैं दुनियावी लिहाज से, उन दुनियावी फ़ज़लों पर अल्लाह ताला के शुक्राने का सही इजहार ये है कि दीन से अटैच हुआ जाए ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा। ठीक है, ये अक्सर लड़कों में भी ये होता है। फिर माओं की तरबियत जो है इस लिहाज से भी करने की ज़रूरत है कि 15 साल तक या 13-14 साल तक कम से कम लड़के भी माओं के ज़ेर असर ही होते हैं। ठीक है।
Jazakallah for that. So again, Hazrat Saab was addressing the lajna, so he was sharing that they should connect with their daughters, but he also said mothers play a role up to a certain age where the sons will also be under their influence. So starting from day one is what I'm hearing from Hazrat Saab. It's really important to adopt. And I think Rizwan Bhai really shared that well. Sometimes we read the body language of our parents. They might not connect with us in the same way by way of English, but when we see they genuinely care, sometimes that opens up doors, that breaks down barriers, and we feed off of that. So I think let's go on to the next couple of questions. May I request you to explain, okay, one second. How can we stop our kids from falling into the liberal trap in our public schools? Meaning these days they're pushing LGBTQ, pro-abortion, etc. Rizwan Bhai, what would you say?
I saw another question that was similar to that, with the media industry, entertainment industry, and that sort of thing, just the broad influence that we have in our society and it's putting on our children. How do we go against it? One way to do it is just the influence that we as parents have. But I feel like there we're really doing an uphill battle, because if the negative influences are everything in the lives of our children, and the only positive influence is the interactions they have with their parents, then that's a very small amount of positive interactions. I think maybe a better or more effective way is to have our children in a circle of positive influence that now we're really lucky to have because of social media. For example, you have Al-Hakam putting out so much material constantly, review of religions. And there's kind of a culture that's created now where, there's a conversation that happens when there's some new guidance that comes from Huzur. Maybe there's a new story that comes. Review of Religions recently shared a story of, I think it was Nuruddin Ahmed Sahib, who said that he went for a mulaqat, and then he had noticed previously that one of his eyes, its prescription, it was getting really weak. And Huzur had noticed that somehow in the mulaqat. And when he went to see his optometrist later on, the optometrist said that it's not possible for someone to just see that just by looking at it. So these little stories that are always coming out, these little things, they create kind of an Ahmadi culture on social media, where when a person is following it, then that's kind of their world. Like when there's something new or interesting that somebody writes in Al-Hakam, then my wife mentions it to me. Someone mentions it because it's something interesting. It's not something Huzur said, but there's a culture that like that Ahmadi said something interesting. That article came out that's interesting. This was published here. So when our social media interactions, when our world starts to take on a more Ahmadi kind of culture, and we feel those things, then it then those problems start to go away. A simple example I can give is just this recent passing away of Sayyid Talha Sahib. In people whose homes have that Ahmadi culture, there was a sadness for like a proper week. Like we were just feeling down and we didn't know really why, or that sort of thing. But it's because when Huzur is in pain, we were in pain too, and then other Ahmadis were in pain. It was something where just through social media, a culture came in where our hearts were all together, and there was like a grief that every Ahmadi home was feeling. And then there are some homes, unfortunately, that are disconnected. They didn't even know anything happened. So in those kind of homes, yeah, if the only kind of counter message they're getting is from a conversation from their parents, it's going to be very hard. But if we create that Ahmadi culture in our households where our children are connected with markaz, are connected with the hearts of other Ahmadis through these organs that we have, then I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Jazakallah Rizwan Bhai. I'm seeing a couple of hands creep up again. So Najib Bhai, let's take it to the live questions.
Let's go ahead and try the live raised hands. So first we'll come to the question from Fateh Bajwa Saab, and then following Fateh Bajwa Saab, we'll come to Nasreen Sahiba. So Fateh Bajwa Saab, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you guys hear me? Rabbi Saab, maybe I misunderstand you, or maybe I didn't hear you correctly, because the question was about the LGBT and all these other things. The Ahmadi culture and all these things. I want to hear, what is the Islamic? Is it allowed or not allowed? Because when I'm telling my kids, my stance is whatever somebody do in their private life, it's their private life. But to say Ahmadi culture, we need to have a clear, absolute, clear understanding. It is not allowed, it is allowed, or what is the guideline from Islam on LGBT?
LGBTQ, perfect. Rizwan Bhai, if you can just revisit that.
Yeah, so I mean, when it comes to doctrine, that's very clear. I mean, there's no absence of clarity there, that the Holy Quran has very specifically talked about homosexuality and it has condemned it. And the point that I was making earlier of how do we scientifically prove it, there I was also describing how even the laws of nature make these people who engage specifically in this behavior at a much higher propensity of getting diseases that they themselves are humiliated to admit. So, I mean, I'm not going to repeat that answer, but the thing is that from an Islamic perspective, this behavior is harmful and it's something that's forbidden. When it comes to, the other aspects like transgenderism, that's a dysphoria. It's a lighter word for a disorder, but it's something that's not healthy. If a person's mental state is not in line with their physical state, then that's a problem that needs to be addressed. The thing is that we are Homo sapiens. We are born with two sexes in 4,999 out of 5,000 cases. It's not that we're just we're something unique in that way. Just like any other primate, we're either born a healthy male or female as a sex. So a person who's born as a healthy male but then thinks that he's a female or vice versa, that's a psychological issue. It's a dysphoria. You can't change the fact that it's a dysphoria. It's a pathology. It's something that needs to be addressed and treated. So the Ahmadiyya Islam perspective is one that's simple and it's in line with nature. That if someone has a psychological issue, then he should get psychological help for it. If he has a physical issue, then he should get physical help for it. Yeah, of course, 1 in 5,000, there are people who are born intersex or hermaphrodite. And of course, there they can get hormonal therapy, which then doesn't change the creation of Allah. It just brings out a sex that's already in them. But the Islamic position on these points is there in the Holy Quran. It's been elaborated in a hadith, and then Huzur has spoken on it many times of why these things are wrong and that we tell people to stay away from them because of the harms that they do.
Jazakallah Rizwan Bhai. You can move on to the next question.
Jazakallah Rabbi Sahib. So next we'll move on to the question from Nisreen Sahiba, followed by Mansoor Shams Sahib. So Nisreen Sahiba, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. And if we don't have Nisreen Sahiba, we can go on to Mansoor Shams Sahib. Mansoor Shams Sahib, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
So I've grown up in the West, and from elementary school to graduate school, my whole life has been the West. But even when that's the case, it's hard to compare my life with the sort of challenges our kids face in various stages right now. So my kids are between 7 to 15. So I somewhat of the question has been, I think, answered, but I'm thinking about asking for practical ways to battle the significant amount of hours that our children spend outside the home or amount of time they're exposed to society, which largely runs, counter to our teachings. I mean, can we provide specific balanced approaches, activities, ideas in day-to-day life we can apply in this limited time that we have with our children?
Azam Bhai, and then I'll ask Rizwan Bhai as well. Azam Bhai, what do you have to say?
Yeah, this is a real challenge. I hear you, Mansoor Bhai, because you've got life that's happening and taking place, but we make choices in life, and I've known people who have chosen to understand that we're going to take some time off, whether it's going to damage or going to hit us financially. But the fact of the matter is not everybody's in the position to do that. This is why the Jamaat is very important. This is why Rizwan, by talking about MTA, Atfal al-Amdiya, in I think it was a ladies' address Jalsa in Germany, 2011, Hazur talked about those parents that do not connect their kids with the Jamaat are killing their kids, right? And so I think if anybody, especially the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, can provide that additional help, but the fact of the matter is the prime responsibility still lays, the prime obligation still lays on us as to how we conduct this task. Everybody's going to have a unique situation, and you'll see what serves you best. But the Jamaat is a great resource. Your local attachment with the local auxiliaries and functioning in their programs and the opportunities that they provide for tarbiyat and talim.
This one, Azam Bhai, I'd just like to add one point. Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam stated, Al-mar'u ala dini khalilihi falyanzur ahadukum man yukhalil. Meaning that man, whoever he befriends is a very close friend, he will go so far as to connect with him as to take on his religion. So whoever your close circle friends are, that will make up, you will become the average of them. So the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam states, be very careful who you consider your close friends. And so I know Hazrat Muslim Maud, he's also shared in Minhajut Talibin about how parents should take it upon themselves. And I know Azam Bhai, you shared something that I still remember to this day. And I mentioned it, I think I mentioned in some other webinar, and I plan to use that for myself. But he posted Minhajut Talibin, Way of the Seekers, the advice that Hazrat Muslim Maud gave to parents when it comes to the upbringing of tarbiyat on his fridge. And he said, look, and this is what Azam Bhai shared with me. I remember we were sitting in a gathering, and I remember it to this day. Hazrat Muslim Maud said that, look, we pick and we carefully let you know who your friendship should look like, who they should be. So know that that's our expectation. That's Hazur's expectation. So bring your friends, I remember like parents. I remember when I was growing up, my parents sometimes would hold like pizza parties at home at our house, or like a little bonfire at our house. So that my dad told me this when I was getting older, but he said I did that intentionally just to see, who your friends are, who are you sitting around with. And according to that, he would pray, guide, and to that, but your friends, your close friends really make or break you. That's one thing.
Yeah, what I'll be honest with you on that point is that you can't start choosing your kids' friends at 12 or 13. It's too late by that point. I mean, it sounds a little overwhelming, but like my kids have, and this is something that I'm realizing now, throughout their childhood, I've constantly reminded them of this. But then there are some other parents that you talk to and they'll be flabbergasted. And it might be an unreal expectation for some folks, but that was a good 26 points that Hazur mentioned there. If everybody just acted on those and follow that. But they're also very high ideals. Like after that, there should be what your child should look like, right? He gives you 4 tests that you do after these 26 points have been implemented. And that's the real test. Can your child function alone, in an environment where he's not being supervised and still know right from wrong? So those are, ultimate ideals, but may Allah Ta'ala help us all.
I think we can share those points as well. But again, at the end of the day, that's what Khilafat is for, right? To raise us to a standard and, you reach for the stars, fall on the clouds type of thing. But Najiba, if we can move on to the next question.
Sure, Murabi Saab. So next we'll move on to the next question. I'll invite Mansoor Qureshi Saab to please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Wa alaikum salam, yes.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. First off, respected Murabiyan, Jazakallah for this, and also Secretary Saab Tarbiyat and Naib Amir Saab. This is beautiful. And it shows we care about our children. I have a quick comment, if you allow, and a question. The comment is just so that we can all pay tribute to our forefathers, our parents or grandparents who raised children in the East also. I know there are unique challenges here in the West, and our children are doing their best and our parents are striving. But I think if those parents were in the West, they would have been successful also, mashallah. So I think we can all learn from our forefathers, our grandparents and parents who taught their children on the East side of the world also. The second is a question, and I think as we are raising our children, I hope and I request one of the Murabbis to share that we also need to prepare our children for marriage. And what are the tips that you would maybe share with the audience to make sure that they are being raised in that sense and learning the proper ways and marrying within the Jamaat and also because the challenges that we're seeing as they grow up. So I hope you can touch on that. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Mansoor Saab. Rizwan Bhai, if you can help us out here.
Yes. There we have the example of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Awwal radiyallahu anhu, where he actually told Hazrat Nawab Mubarakah Begum Sahiba when she was quite young that you should pray for a good husband, that there's no shame in front of Allah Almighty, you should pray for a good husband. So, I think very early on, it starts with us as parents. I have to ask myself that how often do I pray for my daughter that she have a good husband, or my sons that they grow up to have a good spouse, or that they grow up to be good husbands. Because the degree to which I care about something is not really in my claims, my words, it's in my actions. And I can act on that right now with how many of my prayers I devote to my children's future and to their marriages. And then naturally, when I devote that much effort into my prayers, and it'll manifest in action. It'll come out in words when I advise them. It'll come out when the time comes when I have clear priorities when it comes to rishta as well. So a lot of times what happens, and I think we observe this unfortunately at times, that people who seem to be righteous and in their words say that righteousness is a priority, but when the actual time comes for marriage, then their priorities end up being materialistic. They get caught up in that moment, and in a way, a sort of reality comes out. So if we start from the beginning to pray for our children being happy and advancing in spirituality, marrying someone righteous, then when the time of that trial comes, we're not going to get swept up in materialism. So I think, it starts very young. And if we start young, then we won't fail in that test when the time comes in the way that unfortunately some people do.
Jazakallah, Rizwan Bhai, appreciate that. If we can move on to the next question, Najib Bhai.
Ji, Murabi Saab. So next we'll move on to the question from Zahid Manan Saab, followed by Khalid Minhas Saab. So Zahir Saab, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.
So I had a question about one brother asked about how we can practically kind of balance out the spirituality with the worldliness in today's world. One of the things that my father did that was very successful with my brothers and I, and he had 5 boys. and my mother as well, when he did salat, he would simultaneously say the English translation. You know, that Salat Hub just came out today, and it really helps out. I mean, my dad would do the namaz and do the sana, and then do the translation, do the Surah Fatiha, do the translation, do the, you know, when we were in ruku, whatever position we were in. And that takes a little bit longer, but it helps you to, and even helps the children to kind of get a full grasp of what you're saying, and you spend more time with it and you feel more connected. You know, one question about that is that, you know, is it, you know, is that allowed? And I'm just kind of asking just for everyone to you know, kind of learn from this. And then my second question is, usually when the kids come home from school, I have a 9-year-old, a 8-year-old, and a 4-year-old, and what we usually do is, you know, we sit down, we read Quran together, you know, do namaz the way that I said that we do. And then they read Life of Muhammad for 15-20 minutes, and then my wife quizzes them, and it makes it like a Jeopardy match, and they enjoy it. You know, they have their whiteboards and they mark their points, and then sometimes we do Kahoot games. And, you know, lastly is that, you know, and again, is that a good suggestion? And then lastly, one other good way is just find out from your sadr or your guide or whatever Amla members, you know, how you can help serve and be part of the masjid more often. So that'll kind of balance it out. So again, there's some questions in there as well, if you guys can answer that.
So to sift through that, one question, Rizwan Bhai, I'll pose to you. Can we have our children recite both the Arabic and the translation as namaz, if I understood that correctly?
Yeah, that's a question related to jurisprudence. And the thing is that, you know, traditionally, you know, what the way is that we learn the Arabic and then we learn the translation along with it. Now, of course, what we say to new converts is that, you know, you can say the prayer in English initially while you're still learning the Arabic. And once you know the Arabic, we should learn the translation along with it so that we know what we're saying. So in those transitional phases, then of course, these types of things, there's no like hard objection to it. You know, as long as we're reciting the prayer as they're meant to be recited. But the correct practice, the better practice that should be done is that we teach our children the translation of prayer. And this is something that the Tahir Academy syllabus does. It's one of the first things that we learn as we're growing up. So we, you know, learn the translation, and then so that we, and then when our children recite, then once then we know, you know, what we're reciting.
Jazakallah, Rizwan Bhai. I'm going to take a comment, and then actually it segues into a Menti question. Someone just posted saying, it seems that we are overlooking parents and grandparents among us who have raised their children in USA already. Many of them are serving faithfully among us. We might benefit from their practical examples. I couldn't agree more. So Najib Bhai, we have a Menti question on this. I think it's the second one. If you could pull that up, and then we'll just poll the audience and you can share what has worked for all of you. I'm sure there are hidden gems over here amongst us, and we can learn from all of you.
Sure, Rabbi Saab. So just a reminder for everybody, to access the Menti poll, you go to menti.com, that's menti.com, and use this access code, or you can use the QR code that will remain on the screen. So we'll go ahead and pull up the second question. Rabbi Saab, this is the question you wanted, right?
Yes, exactly. So what parenting style did you find most effective when you were a child? So I know Rizwan Bhai shared his, but I'm sure there are either parents here or children here that can help us with this question. So please share your thoughts here and inspire us.
And Rabbi Saab, as many people are probably aware, we'll see that the more popular answers will get bigger and bigger throughout the poll. And so we'll see what people are saying.
So some of the ones, I'll just read them out, is be friendly, lead by example, prayers, going to the masjid, encouraging, compassion, authority. Let's see what else we got. I'm seeing a lot of dealing with your children kindly. I think that's really huge. Sometimes, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there, and when we hear it, it'll be very shocking that my son or my daughter did this. But at that time, how you react, and this is very easy for me to say, I think it'll be more from our elders here. But may Allah Ta'ala never put us in that position. But if any time a position does come like that, the way you react will be just as important as what you have to say. What else is there?
Rabbi said we're seeing that, you know, these three right here in the middle are constantly, you know, the ones staying the biggest, as being submitted the most times. Friendly, lead by example, and prayers. So we're kind of constantly seeing them in the middle.
Excellent. I think we have 86 responses. We'll wait to at least 90, 95. And I think that'll give us a pulse of what has been working for the parents sitting in this audience right now. So up until now, lead by examples, prayers, and friendly. We have 96 responses. So I think that really, that's just overall powerful ways that we can look at it. Jazakallah Najibai for pulling that up. We had one question that came up, and I'll just share it right now, is when should we start tarbiyat? At what age, what time? And I remember there's this clip of Khalifa Rabi rahmatullah alayhi. It's very powerful and quite scary. May Allah help us. Najiba, I think it's which clip is it? Let me tell you. The second clip. If you can play that, I think that'll help us answer this question.
अगर एक माँ बाप ऐसे हैं जो हर वक्त अपनी औलाद में नेकी तलाश करते हैं और नेकी ना नजर आए तो उनके दिल से आह निकलती है, वही आह उनकी दुआ होती है और खुदा ताला उस पर मोहब्बत और प्यार की नजर डालता है। और वो जो दुनिया पे राजी माँ बाप हैं वो बाद में अपनी औलाद को जब बेराह राह होते देखते हैं, उनकी लड़कियां गैरों से भाग रही हैं, उनके लड़के हाथों से निकल रहे हैं, फिर वो रोते हैं, पीटते हैं, दुआओं के लिए लिखते हैं। ये सारी बेहकीकत बातें हैं।
So I know this was it's very powerful, very strong, and very scary many times. None of us here are judging anyone, but the point Hazur is making is that it starts from the beginning. To answer the question very simply, tarbiyat starts from day one. Hazur has shared that in This Week with Hazur at various continuous times. But when children start coming home with problems, to start thinking then to write letters, to start praying fervently, that time in many ways was way before. Now it's time for us to reap those benefits of those prayers. So tarbiyat starts from day one. I think we could take it to the raised hand questions. Jibai.
Sure, Rabbi Sab. So we'll continue with the raised hand questions. We'll come back to Khalid bin Hasab, and following that, we'll come to Tanveer Sahib. So Khalid bin Hasab.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Wa alaikum salam. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Jazakallah. Respected Murabiyan, you're really doing a remarkable job. Thank you so much for doing this. I just wanted to share one point is that I remember when we were young in Baltimore, Fahim Bhai was our Qaid and I was his little supporter, helper. He, while training kids in the masjid, during sleepover, Fahim Bhai mentioned something, and that has stuck with me throughout these years, is that the way kids talk to each other, they reflect their parents, the way they talk to each other at home. So I think that's where the answer is to all our prayers, well wishes, is that if I want my kids to be good human beings, kind to their wives or kind to their husbands, I have to practice that at home, and they will be reflection of me. And I think that's what we do in our lives as grown-ups, even if we are now Ansar, and the way I talk to my brothers in the masjid or I talk to my wife, I'm still copying my parents. I might have learned a couple of things here and there, but mostly my personality, my character, my temperament is what I have learned during those early years in my life. So I think that's the most important thing, is that we are the role models at home 24/7 for our kids. And I wanted Rabbian to kindly reflect on that. And then I appreciate Rabbi Saab mentioning about homosexuality and the scientific reason of it. One thing I would request is that we absolutely have to teach our kids the knowledge of religion, but at the same time, we have to teach them the humanity, and the humanity starts with compassion and serving the fellow mankind, in addition to praying to Almighty Allah. And in that regard, we can hate or we can dislike the act of homosexuality, but we need to keep reminding our kids that we do not hate people for who they are. And that's very, very important balance and point that they need to understand, that as human beings, we still have sympathy towards them and we pray for them if they are our friends. And that's what I wanted to request Rabian to kindly highlight on that. And Jazakumullah for taking my call. May Allah bless you all.
Jazakallah Khalid Sab. Rizwan Bhai, if anything you would like to add to that.
Yes, definitely. And there the example of Huzura Yadaullah is the best example, because you would think that people are so judgmental about homosexuality that if I come to my Sadr, if I come to my Murabbi and say that I'm struggling with this, but I want to be a better Ahmadi, I want to overcome this, then maybe we're going to shut you down or anything, something like that. And it might be that out of weakness, I or someone else, because of our own mistakes, might do something like that. But our example is actually Huzur, because Huzur has mentioned himself examples of how people came to him, and how people themselves have mentioned how they found Huzur so compassionate and loving and understanding of their situation, and then explaining to them and then helping them with different techniques on their journey of trying to overcome these tendencies, which, like I mentioned before, are unhealthy. They lead to a person being exposed to diseases and behaviors that are not good for them. So the example that we have is the example of Huzur Yadaullah, which is that Ahmadiyya Islam is there for anyone who's on the journey of trying to be a better Muslim. As long as a person is on that journey, no matter where they are, no matter how bad we might think they are, no matter how far behind, whatever it is, but it's for people on that journey. And we never say that you're not good enough to be an Ahmadi. So as long as if someone is suffering with the kind of dysphoria of transgenderism, but then they want to be a mentally healthy person and a spiritually good person, if someone is struggling with homosexual desires, then our responsibility is to follow the example of Huzur and be compassionate and be loving and be understanding, and then help them along that journey. And of course, those people in our society who are just against it, who are just adamant and stubborn, we still have to remember love for all, hatred for none, that we may dislike or disagree with the action, but we love the person, the people.
Jazakallah Rizwan Bhai. One other question we got is, what if as parents you realize that you should have raised your children better, but by that time they're already 15 or 16 years old? Is it too late? What can those parents do to make their remaining years spiritually strengthening? Azam Bhai, you can help us out.
Yeah, I think it's according to our Khulafa, Hazrat Khalifa Rabi has also talked about people writing to him for their kids who are 12, 13. And it was his personal experience as well that overwhelmingly these prayers, it was only prayers that was left. And sometimes those prayers didn't even have that efficacy. But the fact of the matter is Allah Ta'ala is At-Tawwab, Ar-Rahim. You ask for forgiveness of Allah, and you hope that you utilize the prayers, or at the end of the day, only resource that we have. That's what I liked about the Menti poll. It talked about prayers, it talked about friendship, and it talked about leading by example, right? So again, it's a dire situation, and that's where you have to say, and I think that everybody got to hear Amir Saab's words again at the West Coast Jalsa. He said, we asked for forgiveness. We failed you. And may Allah, be forgiving on us, and let us not repeat those mistakes. At the end of the day, this is what we're here to learn from,
Jazakallah. Appreciate that, Azam Bhai. All right, so one more is, everyone loves listening to music. Every time in class, there's always someone who asks if we can listen to music. So is it okay to listen to music if we're driving to school or going to work? Is there a limit to how much or how long we should listen to certain songs? I know someone who listens to music almost all day. Rizwan Bhai, how would you answer that?
So it's mentioned in hadith that the Prophet ﷺ came home, and then with Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha, there were girls who were playing drums, mazaif, musical instruments, and singing poetry of the Jahiliyyah. And he didn't forbid it. He said it's fine, to let them do it. So this shows that this was music with musical instruments. And also it wasn't nazm or like religious poetry, it was poetry of the Jahiliyyah. So music is permissible in Islam. But there also elsewhere, the Prophet ﷺ said that a time will come, and he was speaking with words of condemnation, that people will think and consider music and dancing women and things like this to be permissible. So the message that the Prophet ﷺ gave is that it matters what the music is about. What is the content of the music? Is the lyrics, is that according to what Islam has taught? Is it neutral, or is it absolutely against what Islam has taught? Now there, I remember when somebody was telling me that he sat down with one of his friends and said, let's go over the top 10 songs right now and go over the lyrics verse by verse and see how long you can get before something is said or something is promoted, which is not just neutral or something, it's just straight up against what Islam has taught. So this is where just the common sense fatwa comes in, where we can just ask our own heart. It's not that a fatwa has to be given that music is forbidden or music is allowed. We just have to see that what is the music that is popular these days? What is the music that we are listening to? Is it the kind of music that we'd be okay listening to in front of our kids? Or would we shut it off as soon as they came in? Would we want that kind of influence our children to be exposed to it, and so on? And so, our heart will give us a fatwa. So music in and of itself is not forbidden, but we have to decide that, is this music that I'm listening to, is it against Islam? Is it good for me, or what effect is it having on me?
Jazakallah Rizwan Bhai, well put. How do we get our kids to stay away from the opposite sex in regards to shaking hands and hugging that is very common in schools? Azam Bhai.
Again, I guess leading by example. When we have these conversations at home, just knowing off the bat, you have a mother, you have sisters. If you're a boy, how would you want them to be treated or respected? Those are the kind of things you have to have an honest conversation with your kids about. They're going to be put in groups where you have to interact with the opposite gender, and nothing wrong with that. But we as parents have to teach them appropriate interaction. Again, leading by example. But the fact of the matter is, it is a very nuanced challenge, but not impossible. There will be questions that would be raised. Why can't we do this and why can't we do that? But so long as the kids get an answer that appeases what they're already used to, in the home, what they're already familiar with, I think that goes a long way, and that also starts early.
Jazakallah Azam Bhai. Please, this question I believe is answered, but we just got it, so I'll just share it again. Please give guidance that how do we approach the parents who do not involve their kids with the Jamaat because of concern of their kids' educational commitments. So I'll just real quickly say the Khalifa Rabi Rahmatullah clip that we just heard, that was a minute. Hazur said, at one point, these things are going to really, really cause you to make a decision. And these problems start to creep up. The further you get away from light, the closer you are to darkness. That's where Hazur said that then our daughters start running off with non-MD men. When our sons are getting out of control, God forbid any of this happen to any of us, but it's happening. So at this point, these are really hard, real conversations that the Khulafa in the 90s, Hazrat Masih Rabi in the 90s is sharing. That's happening then. It's only getting worse now. So the point being is having that honest, real conversation and providing that to them, and then may Allah Ta'ala, enable them to make that decision upon themselves. Next question is, my son will be 13 years old. Should he attend sexual orientation health class in public school? Rizwan Bhai.
I don't remember if Hazur has answered this question. I feel like this must have been put to Hazur at some point. But I think, do you know? I mean, I don't want to answer without that. I mean, I can just give a very broad answer, which is that, the fact is that whether they attend sexual orientation at 13 years old in school or not, at 11 years old, all of his friends are going to be talking about this anyways. I don't know if there's anybody who learns something brand new in middle school sexual orientation class, which their classmates who are watching pornography every day didn't already tell them. So the thing is that when our children are already being exposed to these conversations, and it's our responsibility as parents to have these conversations with them, to educate them in the right way on these subjects based on, the environment that they have. So, whether they go to that class or not, they're exposed to all that material and far worse on a daily basis by the time they reach 13 years old. I mean, we can look at the statistics and see how many boys in middle school don't watch pornography. You'll have trouble finding boys in high school that don't watch pornography. You want to do a study on pornography in a college, the biggest struggle you have is finding a control group of men who don't watch pornography. You can't even do a study because there's no control group that's there. So the thing is that, whether the question of the class being offered in school or not is just, by this point in our society, is just so irrelevant when it comes to should our children be exposed to this or not. The thing is that our children are unfortunately being exposed to it. 20 years ago when I was a teenager, I was being exposed to it. So we have to have those conversations with our kids and have them responsibly and explain to them what the correct approach is to these subjects.
I will share Hazur, and this week what Hazur shared a couple of months back, that Hazur said that our children are accustomed to hear the culture here, that kids are really used to hearing about things explicitly and very openly. And I know in many of our cultures that we come from, it's very taboo. It's almost, we cringe when we hear those. Hazur said in that guidance, he said, answer the questions of your children in that same manner. So I don't know if that applies directly to here, but Hazur's guidance is that they will hear it either from you or from someone else. The purpose being is that they should hear it from the right sources.
Absolutely. May I add to that?
Yes, please, Azam Bhai, go ahead.
Rizwan Bhai, I keep on coming back to you to get that quote from Hazrat Khalifatul Sisani Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu when he was leading the nikah, and he had mentioned the fact that this marriage could produce a union that could result in something that two physical bodies meet, and that pleasure that's resulted out of that. And Rizwan Bhai, you can finish it off, but there were elders in the audience who were kind of surprised Hazur would mention this. And that's when Hazur said to the effect, Islam mein in mamlat mein koi haya nahi?
Yeah, it's been a long time since I read it, but yeah, basically, Hazur was talking about the connection between the physical pleasure of sexual pleasure with, deep spiritual concepts, which is something that the Sufiyat throughout Islamic history have talked about as well. But there he also mentioned that, there is no shame in Islam when it comes to talking about, things that need to be discussed. And he said even children attend our gatherings. And this is, like in the Khilafat of Hazrat Muslim Maud in the Indian subcontinent, where there was
in the 1940s, I believe.
Yeah, when there was really people were really conservative about that, but Hazur said that no, we can't tell our youngsters or our children to leave these gatherings, but we also have to talk about those things that have to be spoken about. So I forget where it is. I have either it's in
Khutbat nikah. You gave me the reference. I have it. But yeah, I mean, our khulafa have led by example of discussing hard. Sometimes we might feel taboo issues. I feel. Their sexual orientation or the sexual training, I really believe, begins at home, with the parents having that discussion. And sometimes it's a shy taboo that we stay away from. But Hazur even mentioned towards the end of this khutbah that I'm referring to, कि अगर हमसे मालूमात नहीं हासिल करेंगे, अपने शरीर दोस्तों से हासिल करेंगे. He used the word शरीर दोस्त, So the alternative is negative.
Translate that, Azam Bhai. Translate that for English. Translate the Urdu part you just did.
Sharir are rebellious or mischievous friends. They will find the information that they're already discussing, whether it's the sexual nature or whatnot. They'll be having these conversations with their friends, and the outcome will not be wholesome or righteous. It'll be in terms of mischievous or rebellious.
Perfect. Jazakallah, Azam Bhai. Okay, so I think this is the third time this question has popped up. Someone's really itching for the answer. I have young children, and exposure to the evils in society worry me. Is there any guidance on homeschooling? Any examples that someone can share? Rizwan Bhai, if there's anything you want to share on this.
Yeah, there also, I definitely want to see if Hazur has addressed this subject. But in general, the thing is that we're raising our children in this society, and they have to, be able to establish their identity in all of these difficult situations. If a person wants to homeschool, they have their reason to do it, then nobody's going to stop them. There's no objection to it. And even in the past, Jamaat has started schools which are for Ahmadi children or Muslim children. That's also a good thing. And this is the reason why we have places that are our own communities, like in Rabwa, and then also in other places like Peace Village, where we want good influences to be around our children. So there's nothing wrong with the spirit behind it. But at the same time, the thing is that all of our elders, they were raised in their environment, even in Pakistan, where you have to be around people who are using profanity against a promised Messiah, alayhi salam. They raised their children in those environments where they were anti-Ahmadi, violent environments. But there, the children learned to forge an identity that had a strong Ahmadi will. So the thing is that in our society, the thing is, from the Khulafa at present, and from the example that we have of the Khulafa and how they've raised their children, that when it comes to homeschooling, it's not generally something that's been done. But if somebody wants to do it on an individual level, it's fine. But the real point of emphasis is that at some point or another, we have to be able to learn that as an Ahmadi Muslim, I influence others. I'm not influenced by others. And really the only way to inculcate that in our children is by like training them the best that we can and then letting go. And then hoping that when we let go, then those lessons will be, they'll be able to put those lessons into practice.
Jazakallah Rizwan Bhai. It's perfect. So we're getting a lot of questions on different scenarios of homosexuality, and I think there's an appetite or a need for guidance on this matter. Next question is, what's the Islamic perspective of interaction with people who are transgender? So LGBTQ or trans, it says transgender. If your female friend changes her gender, how should we handle our interactions going forward? Rizwan Bhai, and then Azam Bhai, I'll come to you.
So the word gender is used for what a person perceives their sexual identity to be. But the thing is that if somebody is, their sex is a male or their sex is a female, and then they change to the opposite gender from a gender perspective, that now they consider themselves to be of the opposite gender, then there our interactions don't change with them in principle. You know, this is discussed in hadith as well, that those who, I suppose the older word for it is transvestites, or those people who are men who dress like women, who believe that they're women, or women who dress or believe that they're men, mutarajjilat is another word that's used in a hadith. So there, the Prophet ﷺ said that just because a man starts dressing like a woman and considers himself a woman doesn't mean that parda no longer applies. He told his wives that don't let these people into your gatherings that are exclusively female gatherings, that veiling and parda still applies. So like I mentioned before, when it comes to transgenderism, it's a dysphoria. It's a psychological issue. It's a pathology that needs to be treated. There's no reason to see an issue, a problem, and then pretend like it's not a problem. Let's just stick to the science on this point. Political correctness is in its own place, but when science and religion are saying one thing and common sense is saying something, then you have to go along with it. So when it comes to someone being transgender, if they're, biologically their sex is a female and then their gender is a male, they think that they're a man, the guidances of a hadith are there, and that's clear. Now, when it comes to someone changing their sex, they actually go through surgery, they go through whatever procedure it is, and now they're no longer physically of the same gender. There, I'm not sure. I mean, there, I think guidance would have to be sought from Huzur on what to do in that situation. But as far as I remember, that there was one situation that came up in a certain place, and there, the guidance that was given, this is just based on my memory, which is that we just have to treat a person according to their sex, their physical sex, which is male or female. So if someone changed, then that's between them and Allah Almighty, but that's their sex. But like I mentioned before with transgenderism, that we have to be clear and we have to be straightforward on it. The thing is that we are in a position of strength. Transgenderism is a dysphoria. We're just telling people that when you have a psychological problem, you should solve the problem with the psychological issue with psychological treatment. If I have a problem where I think that I'm white, I'm not originally Desi from the suburbs, I'm not brown, I want to be white, I'm going to put on blue contacts, I'm going to bleach my hair and put on Fair and Lovely. That's not a healthy response to that psychological issue that I'm having. To bring my physical body in line with the psychological dysphoria or a problem that I have, that's not a healthy thing. So the thing is, if I have a psychological issue where my physical reality is at odds with what my identity is, then that's an issue. I wouldn't encourage somebody to say that, yeah, go ahead, bleach your hair, put on Fair and Lovely and get blue contacts. No, you have an issue with psychologically and you need psychological treatment and help. So this is just a simple, straightforward and common sense perspective that holds true throughout all ages. It's not confined to the fashions of the particular morals that and political correctness people have today.
Jazakallah Rizwan Bhai. Next question is, and I think we're wrapping up to one of our last ones, then we're going to have to show a couple of clips. What is the Islamic view on genetic engineering? Azam Bhai, help us out with this one.
Gee, this is a quick one, so that's why I said I'd probably take it, was that Islam doesn't view genetic engineering in like a binary sense of black and white. What Islam views as detrimental is when you try to change the creation of Allah. But that's what's wrong with genetic engineering, is where you try to change the creation of Allah. But what is allowed is, for example, if there are certain deficiencies that could be repaired. And for example, if sometimes there's an accident in your DNA that's passed on, just to repair that and to make sure that it can maximize life, anything that does that is allowed.
Perfect. Jazakallah Azam Bhai. Can we wish and celebrate birthdays with our immediate family? Rizwan Bhai?
Yeah, I know the answer to this question because my daughter's birthday was just like 2 days ago. And so, yeah, we were going over Huzur's guidance on that. And there Huzur said that, basically, that idea of having a party, getting together with friends, that sort of thing. There's no precedent for that in Islam. And, that's a cultural practice that we shouldn't just blindly follow. But when it comes to just in our homes, having like a gathering, having some cake, having some food that we like, and then having special prayers on that day for that person, there's no harm in that. So just to kind of, like a small birthday celebration in the way that children like to do, that's just in the home, just with the family, that's fine.
Perfect. I'm just going to answer this real quickly, and then we'll segue into a Menti question that's really going to help us. So why do we not have more open discussions on LGBTQ and what are not on Jamaat forums? So just to answer that, that's actually the plan, inshallah. I want Najib Bhai, if you can pull up the Menti question. This one's important because right now, this is the opportunity for the audience. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of appetite. We're seeing it right now. There's a bunch of stuff just still flooding in about what to talk about on parenting. So now we are holding a 12 webinar series on parenting. So I'd like to ask our audience here, and if Najib Bhai, once he pulls up the Menti question, but what is it that you would like to be the topic? And we'll try to adjust as much as we can and share what you guys have in your mind. But what specifically? So I'm hearing LGBTQ as one of them. I'm just giving an example. What specific aspects of parenting should we cover in future webinars?
Yeah, just to add one point, the person in the question asked, why aren't we talking about it enough? I mean, from my perspective, even in like the Khudam al-Ahmadiyya, the youth camps that we had, we talked about it. The spiritual fitness camps from the National Tarbiyat Department, we talked about it. We've had like 4 questions on it in this session. I mean, I've been talking about it so much, I'm always getting tired of it. So I don't know, like maybe some people, they think we're not talking about it enough, but I mean, maybe we could talk about it more, but we are talking about it.
I think you're right. It's getting tiring for the ones giving the answers, but a lot of people, they're just there's a lot on the minds and a lot of scenarios out there that are quite scary. So I'm going to request also that if Najib Bhai, is there a way we can capture these responses so even after the webinar we could save these and look them and then incorporate that into our future webinars?
Sure, Rabbi Sep. So as we're seeing the answers, but we'll inshallah have a copy of it as well, and so we can refer back to this list when Tarbiyat team plans future webinars.
Perfect. So right now we're seeing is how to find suitable rishta matches, how to limit screen time, love of Allah Ta'ala and Khilafat, effects of social media, prevention of negative effects, psychological and behavioral issues, trend about marrying outside the Jamaat, importance of families getting connected to Jamaat, limiting phone and screen time, the responsibilities of parents. I think that one's, all of these are great, and just reading them out loud so you can all hear.
And there's one on here, it's health, eating food. I think my mom was just telling me I've been eating too unhealthy recently, so I need to ask if she's the one who sent this one in.
That's a good one. Practical tips that fathers can follow in regards to parenting. So we're saying that, mothers and fathers want specifically like, hey, what is my role? What should I be doing? I think that's really helpful. Trends of Western culture and how to combat them. Let's see, talk about puberty and sex, drug use, hookah, smoking, parda, how to bond atfals together, raising kids in homes where the husband and wife have issues. So we're seeing a lot of these. This is very helpful. Right now we have 96 responses. I'll wait till we have 100. And
it's very obvious there's a lot of strong opinions, a lot of ideas for this. So alhamdulillah, it means that people are taking well to the idea of the series.
Excellent. Yeah, this is really good. How to handle difficult conversations with teenagers. So perfect. We're at 100 responses. So I think this is very helpful. I'm going to request you, Najib, we'll save these. And there's a last clip of Huzur that I think answers a couple of questions that we saw. I'm just going to ask Najib to play that, and then we'll get to wrapping up.
चुनाचे कुरान करीम फरमाता है कि जब तक दोनों फरीक एक दूसरे के लिए आंखों की ठंडक ना बने, उस वक्त तक ये तवक्को रखना कि औलाद से हमें आंखों की ठंडक नसीब होगी, ये एक फर्जी बात है। और इसमें एक बहुत ही गहरी हिकमत बयान फरमाई गई है जिसका गहरा इंसानी नफ्सियात से ताल्लुक़ है। हकीकत ये है कि वो वालिदैन जो एक दूसरे से आंखों की ठंडक पाते हैं, उनकी औलादें हमेशा उनके लिए आंखों की ठंडक बनती हैं। तरबियत में यकजहती पाई जाती है और एक ही मिजाज के साथ बच्चे परवरिश पा रहे होते हैं। और वो माँ बाप जो एक दूसरे से सच्चा प्यार करने वाले और एक दूसरे का अदब करने वाले और एक दूसरे का लिहाज करने वाले, एक दूसरे की ज़रूरियात की तरफ ध्यान रखने वाले और अखलाक से पेश आने वाले माँ बाप होते हैं, उनकी औलाद भी अपने माँ बाप से भी प्यार करने वाली बनती है और आपस में भी एक दूसरे के साथ निस्बतन बेहतर ताल्लुकात कायम करती है।
So I think that's really powerful. In the beginning, Fahim Saab read from the Tilawat of the Holy Quran, and we all know this prayer, Rabbana hablana min azwajina wa dhurriyyatina qurrata a'yunin waj'alna lil muttaqina imama. Meaning that, oh Allah, grant us from our spouses and our children the delight of our eyes and make us leaders amongst the righteous. So Khalifa Rabi Rahmatullah expounded a very great point, that if you want to receive peace and happiness and look at your children and be happy with them, you have to be able to look at your spouse and be happy with them. So it's first have a good connection. And I remember Bilal Anasab one time in a speech he was sharing, and it still stuck to me. And it was about, we really, as parents, we get almost infatuated, or we have so much love for our children. But that's the fruit of the tree. You have to also be thankful and appreciative of the tree that bore that fruit. And that's equally as important. That stuck with me to this day. And I think that's exactly what Khalifa Rabi Rahmatullah is stating over here, that look and try to create better relationships with our spouses. That enables us to be on the same page. That enables us to carry that forward. Not only does that help us in our own homes, but then our children, Hazur said, that they generally, more likely than not, will have good relationships amongst themselves. So we as parents, when we leave and we pass from this earth, we have that peace of mind that they are looking after each other. So with that being said, I think we got some really good feedback. I keep seeing in the group chat or the chat that those points from Hazrat Muslim and from Minhaj al-Talmeen, if they can be shared. I believe the link was shared here, but the Tarbiyat department will share with the Tarbiyat secretaries those points, and we'll distribute that after this webinar. I think, Najib Bhai, we have some key takeaways here. So one, I'll just say three, and then I'll ask Azam Bhai and Rizwan Bhai to share anything if we have anything in the next 2 minutes. But the one thing that we learned from Hazur, and I think it's often repeated, is that we need to befriend your children. It's very important in this day and age. That word cloud, what we are referring to, the most common thing that all of you shared in your experiences was kindness, sympathy, compassion. Irregardless of what they bring to your table, your child should have enough confidence to be able to come to you in their time of need. If they don't, then we can't help them. And this is very scary. It's not easy, and there's no judgment here. And one thing I want to add just on this point, Khalifa Rabi Rahmatullah, in that same sermon, which is the 29th of June, 1990, he said that even if you are the most holy of holy people, even if you are the most righteous, accidents happen. Things can happen to children. We have the example amongst prophets. We have the examples amongst Sahaba. The point he made, which is very important for us as parents, if there are any parents here sitting in this crowd who are thankful for their great children, Hazur said that you should be humble about this, because we never know what can happen. This is a time, each step along the process of parenting requires us to be humble, and may Allah Ta'ala forgive our weaknesses, because we all have many, many weaknesses. The second point, taqwa needs to be a prerequisite from day one. Like Hazur says, not when problems arise, because then it becomes too late. So many families here, many parents are here who are maybe, time flies. Honestly, I think I'm learning that I'm just in the beginning stages, to be honest. I have a 2-year-old daughter, but literally those 2 years went by. So I'm actually learning from a lot of our brothers here, panelists here. But Hazur shared that from day one, that it needs to be taken care of. And the final point I'd like to share is that seek to find peace with your spouse, then your children, because again, that's what's going to bring peace in the home. So it's really, really important. If you can close that slide, Najib Bhai, and if Azam Bhai, you want to add something, we have like 1 minute left, and then 30 seconds, and then Azam Bhai, and then we'll respect everyone's time. So Rizwan Bhai, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. I'll just share a point on priorities that this is a muhasabah that I should do and that we all can do, that what is really important to us. Because, if materialism is important to me, then I would be humiliated if I'm driving around in a busted up car, if I'm living in a poor neighborhood, or if I have to tell my friends that my, children, they didn't get into this university or they're doing this menial kind of job. I feel humiliated in that. But when I compare that to how would I feel if my child was not a good Muslim, failed in spirituality, then how bad would that make me feel? So it's the same thing like in the Rishnata process, where when we care about spirituality, we never say that, well, this guy, he'll start reading namaz after he gets married, or she'll start doing parda afterwards. If a person cares about spiritual, they say we need those now. In the same way that when somebody cares about beauty, they don't say, oh, he'll lose weight afterwards, or she'll lose weight afterwards. Or maybe they care about wealth, so they say that, oh, he'll get a good job afterwards. No, we want the things that we want now that are important to us. So when it comes to raising our children, I have to see that, is spirituality important to me? Or is worldly priorities important to me? And that's really what it comes down to.
Jazakallah Rizwan bhai, well put. Azam bhai, anything you want to end on?
No, I just wanted to remind myself that I think it's really appreciative that we're dealing with this subject with a level of humility. None of us are perfect, and Allah Ta'ala forgive us our sins. Ameen. Secondly, is the fact that we've seen this is the ticket for us making that great struggle for either our kids are a ticket to paradise, or the Prophet ﷺ says hell. The ticket is there. Now we're the ones who are obligated and responsible for putting that stamp. And so that choice that we make, like Rizwan Saab talked about priorities, that's in our hands. And so it's what we choose to do with that priority. May Allah Ta'ala bless us all.
Jazakallah Azam bhai. So respecting everyone's time at 7:30 p.m. Please pray for all those families that are hurting. Please pray for all those future husband and wife. Everyone, all of us are on a journey. No one is finalized. They have that seal that everything is all right. We are all learning from each other and from our khilafat and from Allah Ta'ala. So please pray for one another and ourselves. Join me in silent prayer. Ameen. Jazakallah everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.